Hey guys.
So I think we're going to get back to how you got into startups, the various things you started before you got to Cruise and all that. But I actually want to start with the question that I'm asked the most in the last year, which is you sold Cruise to GM now a little over a year ago.
Almost 2 years, yeah.
Almost, oh, wow. And I guess the question I get asked all the time is why? You had already had success previously, which we'll get to. You weren't looking for a payday for sure. So we could have raised a lot more money and kept going. So why the acquisition? And how's it going?
Well, that's good. Good question. I think it was an interesting time. Like building self-driving cars is a really challenging business, both for technical reasons and also just the industrial scale of producing lots of cars. Yeah. And at this time in the company, we had pretty good technology, and we were really driven by this mission to use this technology to reduce car accidents, make transportation safer and more accessible. So it's a very mission-driven culture, and we were faced with this decision, this fork in the road. And if you go one direction, you stay an independent company. You have the pride of being a startup and trying to one day IPO or go down that path. But it's a longer road, might take longer to get there. And the other road is partner with one of the largest automakers in the world, and to try to decrease that time to take this technology and achieve the impact we hope it would achieve. And so it was really a testing moment. It's like if we truly believe in this mission and shortening the timeline from building the technology to deploying at scale, we're going to need the help of a major OEM. And so we made that choice.
And so for you, it felt like a way of almost like accelerating your own mission.
Absolutely. I mean, the mission we're on now is the same one we were doing as an independent company. Yeah. We're just going to get there much faster as a result.
Cool. So you started this journey. I remember this conversation the first time we met. This journey for starting a self-driving car company started back in college, quite a bit earlier, and before several other startups. If you loop back to that original one and working on the MIT DARPA challenge at United MIT, did you think that was going to be a startup at that point in time? Were you even interested in startups at that time, actually?
My short time at MIT, I didn't make it all the way through, was sort of plagued by side project after side project. I had this whiteboard where I had a list of 10 really cool things I wanted to build, and so I was always skipping class and going and working on these projects. And one of them was the DARPA Grand Challenge, and that became an all-consuming one. And I think just because first of all, it's one of the coolest things you can do as an engineer: make a car, this big hunk of metal, drive around. These are very large, impressive, technically capable robots. So I had a lot of fun doing it. And so that was one of the driving forces for me. But I did always want to do a startup, and it was sort of, the evidence was there sort of between the lines, so to speak, by the fact that I was focusing on all these projects, building robots, building things, rather than spending as much time as I probably should have in classes. And I think that's a good quality, just wanting to be a builder and make something.
Yeah. So then how did you pick the first thing that actually became a startup?
My previous company, which became Twitch, was very serendipitous. I met my co-founders, Justin and Emmett, when they were looking for a person to help take their reality TV show and stream it to the internet 24/7. So it's a long, crazy adventure. And so, it sounded like a great opportunity to join up with some entrepreneurs and take one of these projects and turn it into something real. Right. And I'd say the one big lesson I learned from that is I had that whiteboard of 10 different ideas I wanted to work on. When I started a company, it was so stressful and so intense and so driven and so high pressure that I could only focus on one thing. Right. And so I let all the others drop off. But by focusing on that one thing, we made progress much faster. And in the end, it turned into a really great company. And so that value of focus and basically saying no to all the cool stuff you could do, including coming to conferences for the most part, and focusing on the one thing that matters most is something that still drives how I think about building companies today.
So if you can back up a couple years to the beginning of Cruise then, so Justin TV becomes Twitch. Twitch has a pretty sizable exit. You've now gone through this arc where you've pivoted a couple times inside of an idea, inside of a startup. You've probably now got another whiteboard somewhere where you're thinking about what you want to do next. Did that experience change how you decide what you want to work on? Like what are the, your proverbial serial entrepreneur and you're trying to think about where you're going to spend the next X number of years, and you now have a feeling of what that focus feels like. So how did you come to decide on the next step?
Yeah, the first company that I sort of did almost on a whim, meeting up with these entrepreneurs, it's every overnight success actually has a 10-year journey behind it,
Yeah.
and this was the case here as well. It took 8 years to go from starting the company all the way through the exit. And so when I thought about what to do after that, I realized that this is a major commitment. This is 10 years of my life, and probably the most productive years of my life.
Yeah.
And you only get a few shots, if you think about things in 10-year chunks of time. So I made a list and said, okay, if I'm going to invest 10 years of my life on something, I want it to count.
Yeah.
And so for me, that was three things. I wanted to use, the skills I had as an engineer and developed to do something good. So high potential social impact. The second one is it had to have extremely hard technical problems that need to be solved, because I know that's what engages me and keeps me motivated, I'm sure with many of you. And the third one is it had to be a good business, because to actually achieve that positive social impact, you need scale. And this is one of those examples of using capitalism as a really powerful tool to achieve positive social change. So those are the three things I wanted, and I spent a long time thinking about potential businesses that would satisfy those criteria. And self-driving cars checks all three boxes, 11 out of 10 for technical challenge, potential impact, and then the size of the business opportunity.
Yeah.
And so when I came to that conclusion, it was just like, done. That's what I'm doing.
I mean, it's hard to go back now, but I mean, it might check all those boxes. But I mean, the truth is that at the time that you started Cruise, you're now, I think the world's realizing that you've built what is now the leader in self-driving cars, but at that time there weren't even that many self-driving car companies, right? So if that checked 11 out of 11 for you, what did you know that the rest of the world didn't know, that there weren't 10, 20, 30 self-driving car companies out there at the time? It was really just kind of Google R&D and then of course academic R&D.
Yeah, well, I think there's a couple things there. One is, I had created this very clear decision-making framework that I believed in and trusted. So, that was my own belief, and I'm going to stick to that and follow that to fruition. The second one is, I think that there was this belief at the time, which still exists today to some extent, which is that if Google or another large company is in a space, that means startups shouldn't go there. You can't compete with them, which we know isn't necessarily true. You can chip away at the problem in a different way and sort of attack these companies from the side. And another thing is that if a large company specifically, has been working on something for a really long time and hasn't finished it yet or hasn't launched something, then that must mean it's really, really hard or borderline impossible. Yeah. And that also deters people from doing it.
Right.
But when you reason through it from first principles and say, well, what are the real blockers that actually prevent something like this from existing, and you can't find any, that either means you don't know enough, which is probably the case, or you're onto something, and that's the risk you take, I think, as an entrepreneur.
Do you think like a little naivete is critical and important to get you on the road?
Absolutely. I think that's something that scares me. If I ever start another company many years in the future, is will I just go into something blindly, almost intentionally, knowing that there's probably some other rocks you could turn over to find good reasons not to do something.
Yeah, I think about it as like that startup. It's such a long-term commitment. It's like falling in love, and there's a certain point where if you overanalyze every little thing, it makes it really hard to fall in love with.
Very easy to talk yourself out of something. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So you sold Twitch, you exited Twitch, you've made a decent amount of money, and there's a good substantial business that's existing inside of Amazon even today. You're going to go start a new company. You could have, frankly, self-financed. So I'm curious why you went down the road. For folks that don't know, you went back into YC a second time. Didn't need to do that, and then raised a rather. I don't know, by the time we invested in the A round, I think there were like 50 people on the cap table or something. You raised a lot of angel money from a lot of small checks. Yeah. And then the Series A, where you kind of pared down and had one major investor. I just love to walk through, given that you were a veteran and kind of like went in with your eyes open into that process, how you navigated from a financing standpoint the business.
Well, the first thing was I thought, self-driving cars, even at the time, I was aware of the fact that it sort of seemed like a moonshot for a lot of people, even if it seemed, feasible from my perspective. And we still don't have self-driving cars ubiquitous today, so we're not done yet. So my attitude was I need to raise like all the money I possibly can, because this is extremely risky. So anyone who will write me a check, I'll take it. I'm going to need it. So I did that, and I pitched 120 individual investors over the course of several months, which was pretty grueling.
Brutal, yeah.
And shockingly, I got like 50 or some really high number to say yes. And I think if you pitch that many times, you're going to get good at it anyway. You can sell anything. But that worked out. But the reason I wanted investment is I wanted to have some outside validation. And even as a very motivated person myself, I wanted someone else. I wanted to create extra constraints for myself, more accountability, more pressure, just to keep myself honest. And so that's why I raised money. That's why I went through YC and ultimately partnered with you. By the way, that self-financing thing, I think I used that as a threat to negotiate against you at one point.
You did actually.
Yeah, that was good.
And did that? So you wanted an outside board member mostly for internal pressure. Is that for you or for you and the team?
Well, two things. So Y Combinator was great to go through just to create sort of this pressure, a little fun camaraderie and competition.
Yeah.
Also creates this critical mass of really brilliant people all working on the same problem at the same time. And then ultimately, the investor day where you get, it's really an efficiency thing. You get to expose yourself to hundreds of Silicon Valley's best investors in one shot, which saves you a lot of time. So that was really powerful. And then, on the VC side, when you and I worked together, it was really more about, finding the right partner and someone I thought would actually, in many aspects was smarter than myself, which was you, and you brought a lot of value to the table there on, my own blind spots and weak spots. And so having like an additional person at the table who can help you with those really tough decisions is important, because you only have, a couple founder slots in the company. Yeah. So anyone outside the company that you can have that provides that level of really direct, pragmatic advice and is willing to get invested enough to really understand your problems is worthwhile. And that was one of the greatest benefits of finding a VC, and specifically you in this case, to help us out.
Yeah, that was. It just didn't last long enough. It was a good partnership for a while. And did you think similarly about the founding team? Can you talk a little about, you've had, through the course of the previous startups, built probably a broad network through YC and being an early member in an early YC class, also probably a really broad network. So how did you approach what it sounds like was a pretty first closed in, like I'm very deliberately building out what kind of company I want to build, but then I now need to go bring other people on board and build a team. So how did you go about that early process? Well,
I mean, the early team is critical, right? I think there's a lot of analogies to marriage or long-term relationships with founders in the early team. And so, I reached out to my network, people I knew and trusted. So, Dan Kahn, who was our COO, I had worked with him actually through Justin TV because he was my previous co-founder's brother, interacted with him for a number of years, and so he was someone I trusted and knew would just get things done. Yeah. And so you need that kind of scrappiness and initiative in the early stages for a company, and it's still a very valuable asset for the company today. And all the early engineers were people that I managed to make friends with during my brief time at MIT and drag them out of whatever jobs they were in. Yeah. So now all my friends from Boston have moved to San Francisco and joined various startups and things.
I'm sure the Boston entrepreneurial ecosystem is very happy for you to do that. We only have a couple more minutes left, but I'm curious today, you're now a part of GM, but operating as an independent entity. You're growing very quickly. What are the challenges you see over the next couple of years for the business?
For the business, I mean, we've got to launch this stuff. We've got to get these self-driving cars out there and at massive scale before we can unlock all those great benefits. And so to get there, I think I've talked about this a little bit in the past, but it requires the perfect merger between two very different entities. You've got General Motors, which is extremely competent at building these enormously challenging and intricate machines on time, on budget, and with a low defect rate. Mm-hmm. Very reliable, very process-driven. And then on the other hand, you've got sort of an innovative technology company that's trying to push the envelope of performance for all these systems and sort of figure things out for the first time. Mm-hmm. And culturally, those things at first don't stick well together when you try to force them together. They're like repelling magnets. Yeah. And so the challenge for me has been able to get everyone to come to the table, put their ego aside, and think very thoughtfully about where the strengths lie between these two organizations that are coming together, and ultimately build something that's greater than the sum of their parts. And that has been a challenge. It will continue to be a challenge, but it's going really well at this point.
Yeah, well, it's an amazing foresight to take the idea that this is not just a technology challenge, that ultimately there is a manufacturing challenge. If you want to be the leader in self-driving cars, then somebody has to make hundreds of thousands of self-driving cars out there, and that this marriage would help that happen. So I'm glad you did it. Congrats. I think we're done for today. Thanks so much. Thanks for coming.
Thanks.